Good day, students. This is topic 2, lesson 5. What makes triangles congruent? So, we're taking a hard turn and looking now at triangles and their congruency. And we've talked about figures and their congruency in rigid motion or in rigid transformations. But today we're going to look at specifically triangles and determining how, in fact, we can show that two triangles are congruent. And we discussed this in our warm-up activity that we can find that two triangles are congruent if we can show that their corresponding sides and their corresponding angles are in fact congruent. So let's look at a couple examples. Example number 1 says determine whether the two given triangles are congruent, and then we're going to explain our reasoning. So the first thing we have to do is compare the sides of the triangle, determine if these sides are in fact corresponding and congruent. Remember, corresponding means that we have the sides matched up from both of the triangles based on the order in which they are given. So if I look at the first pair of sides, we have GH and KL. So GH I see is 1.7 meters, and KL I see is also 1.7 meters. So that tells me that these two sides are in fact corresponding because they match with the same measure. So because they have the same measure, I can say, in fact, these two sides are congruent. HJ, so HJ is 1 meter, and I see that LM is 1 meter. And these two sides are in fact corresponding because their measures are equal. They match up. So if the measures are equal, we can say, in fact, that HJ and LM are congruent. Then we're looking at sides GJ and KM. So GJ I see is 2 meters and KM is also 2 meters. So their sides are equal. So I can say that the sides are in fact congruent. So far we've shown that the 3 pairs of sides are congruent. Now we have to just make sure that the angles are congruent. So now we're going to compare the angles. Okay, so we have angle G, the measure of angle G is 30 degrees, and then the measure of angle K is 30 degrees. So because these angle measures are the same, I can say these two angles are in fact congruent, angle G and angle K. The measure of angle H and the measure of angle L. So H and L I see are 90 degrees both. So their measures are equal, so that means that the angles are congruent. And lastly, I have J and M. J and M, I see both are 60 degrees. So because the measures are equal, I can say, in fact, the angles are congruent. So that shows me that their angles are congruent. So if their angles are congruent, the corresponding pairs of angles and the corresponding pairs of sides are congruent, then I can say, in fact, that triangle GHJ is congruent to triangle KLM because the corresponding sides and I'm getting ahead of myself, and angles are congruent. Okay, so let's take a look at example number 2. It says determine whether the given triangles are congruent, and then once again we're going to explain our reasoning of why or why not. So first, let's compare the corresponding sides to determine if they are congruent. So I see side AB as being 12.1 centimeters. I also see in our second triangle that side DE is also 12.1 centimeters. So because these two sides have the same measure, have equal measures, I can say that these two sides are in fact also congruent. So side AB is congruent to side DE. Side AC shows to be 7.9 centimeters, and looking at the second triangle, I see that side DF is also 7.9 centimeters. So if the measure of the sides are the same, we also know that the sides are also congruent. So AC is congruent to DF. But the last side, BC, I see is 8.5 centimeters. And looking at the second triangle, I have side EF as being 8.4 centimeters. So I can determine that these side lengths are in fact not equal to each other. And if they are not equal to each other, then we know for sure that they are not congruent. So we can conclude that triangle ABC and triangle DEF are not congruent because the corresponding sides are not congruent. Okay, so let's look at an example in regards to angles. So it says find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. So we have here that angle A, if I'm looking solely at the markings of the two triangles, I see that angle A is congruent to angle D because it has one arc here. And then angle B is congruent to angle E because it looks like it has 3 arcs for the angle. And angle C is congruent to angle F because it has 2 marks. So far we have corresponding angles that are congruent. And looking at the triangle, it says side DE would correspond to what side? Well, DE has the endpoints of D and E, and we know D corresponds to A based on the angle that we saw. So that would have to be the first endpoint. And we know that E corresponds to B because we just stated that right here in our second statement. So that means that these two sides would be corresponding. And if they're corresponding, and we already said that the angles are congruent, we can only assume that the sides are congruent right now. But we have to prove that by finding the value of y. So to do that, we're going to set up an equation. So let's set up to say that side DE is equal to side AB. DE we see in the second triangle as being 2y plus 20, and AB we see as being 36 millimeters. Now we're just going to solve for y and then show, based on what we saw for y, to see in fact if these two sides are congruent. So solving for y, I'm going to subtract 20 on both sides, so that leaves me with 2y equals 16. And I'm going to divide both sides by 2, which leaves me with y equals 8. So we can't say in fact right now that the value of y is 8 because we have to prove first that the sides are in fact congruent. To do that, we can just plug in 8 for side DE. So side DE, we know to be 2y. Instead of y, we're going to put in 8 plus 20. So we have 2 times 8 gives me 16. 16 plus 20 gives me 36. So that means side DE is 36 millimeters. Well, if side D is 36 millimeters, and we see it corresponds to side AB, which is also 36 millimeters, we can say that DE is in fact equal to AB. And because these two sides are equal, we can in fact say that y is, the value of y is 8, and that these two triangles would have to be congruent to each other. And let's look at our last example. Example 4 says find the value of the variable that results in congruent triangles. So they are telling us that the measure of angle M is equal to the measure of angle J. So let's look at M and J, and we see in fact they are equal because they are both 55 degrees. And then it tells us that the measure of angle N is equal to the measure of angle K, and we see that is also true because they are both 45 degrees. And they want us to find the value of X, which is for angle P, 5x plus 30. But we can't do that until we determine the last angle that we have here in the first triangle. And that is to find angle L. So that would leave us saying that angle L and P are corresponding. Right? But to find angle L, if I'm trying to find this missing angle here, remember if I have 2 angles in a triangle and I'm trying to find that third angle, we know that all the angles, so that means the measure of angle J plus the measure of angle K plus the measure of angle L, all of these angles equal 180 degrees. And that is my setup, ladies and gentlemen. So that means I can substitute in those values. 55 for J, 45 for K, L, I still don't know. But we know they all equal to 180. So 45 and 55 gives me 100. And I'm solving for L. So I subtract 100 on both sides, and that leaves me with the measure of angle L as 80 degrees. So now that I know that L is 80 degrees, so we can erase this here and put 80 degrees. Now that I know that L is 80 degrees, I know L is also corresponding to P. So that would help me find X, right? So I can set up an equation. I can say that the measure of angle L equals the measure of angle P. So when I substitute L, I have 80. P is 5x plus 30. And now we're just going to solve for X. So if I subtract 30 on both sides, I get 50 equals 5x. Divide both sides by 5, so I get X equals 10. But how can I know for sure the value of X is 10? Well, let's figure out what the value of P actually is. So the measure of angle P is 5 times X, which I know is 10, plus 30. 5 times X I know is 50. 50 plus 30 is 80. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I know that both measures of angle L and P are 80. So that tells me that X equals 10 is, in fact, my answer. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that does it for today's lesson. Once again, please make sure that you are going back to your warm-up activity and your OneNote class notebook to review the vocabulary terms and definitions for this lesson. And remember, you always have the videos to watch as well. Good day, students, and I will see you in class.